What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. This is a long one, so I'm not going to take too much time with introductions. As you know, Unicron got funded. I'll show you the chart real quick. Shout out to Brian Brink from Breaking the Mold and End of the Realm. The numbers are... the numbers need some scrutiny, I feel like. I don't know when I'm going to do that, but it's not today. Something seems weird about it. Either way, I was in for it, so I get the toy I want, so I win. But there is a responsibility I have to kind of question some things. So maybe we'll dig into that a bit at some point. I just don't know when that point will be. I'm so tired of talking about it. Sit Down Saturday last week with the convention stuff. Some other people had some really good kind of input in the comments, so read through the comments and look through some people's kind of recommendations and such. There's some really good points in there that I missed that some people brought up. Other than that, this is an interview about licensing. It is very dry. It's with Cracked Earth Studios. This is for people that are really into this toy stuff and how it all kind of works, how the nuts and bolts of it work. So if you're interested in that, it's for you. If you're not interested, it's not for you. It gets into some nitty gritty and it's dry, right? It deals with the business end of things, which I am super obsessed with, but I know is not for everybody. October's a very busy time of month for me. I was just going to kind of put up their logo and just let the interview ride, but I was like, man, that's just kind of a cheat. So I threw in some kind of For Dummies type stock footage stuff just to hopefully make it a little bit more entertaining if you're actually going to watch it and not listen to it. Don't worry about the sacrifices I make. I'll be fine. But I do want to thank Cracked Earth. The link to them will be in the description if you want to check out any of their products. They basically, I explained it a little bit in the introduction, but they hit me up, asked me if I wanted to kind of review some stuff, and I was like, it doesn't really make sense for this channel, but if you want to talk about licensing, I'd be down to talk about that because that sort of stuff fascinates me. So without any further ado, shout out to them for being sports and kind of coming on and letting me ask whatever I want. Obviously, I knew I was going to ask some questions that they weren't going to be able to answer, but I feel like if I didn't ask those questions, you guys would know that I was kind of holding back, and I can't hold back now, can I? That's not really what I'm about. So let's get into it. Cracked Earth Studios, Bradford Exchange, a conversation about licensing. What's up, everybody? We have something special today. Every now and then we get the chance to do something special, and although this doesn't relate necessarily immediately to Transformers, it does relate to licensing. And licensing is something that we talk about repeatedly on this channel. It's something that comes up along with trademarks and copyrights and patents and all the other things that we normally address. And I am joined today by Drew from Cracked Earth.
Hey there, how's it going?
It is going extremely well. Cracked Earth, I like to be transparent about all this stuff because a lot of people are not. Cracked Earth contacted me to work with me in some regard to the product. I looked at the product and I was like, I'm not sure that it would fit necessarily within the dynamics of what I do normally on my channel, but the fact that you have obtained all these licenses does lend itself to a conversation that we've always been interested in regards to how those things are acquired. So I reached back to them and I suggested that. They were very on board with that idea and thought it would be unique and interesting, which I love to hear. And then you got in contact with me and then we lined this up.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
beautiful. Beautiful. Let's get right into it. When I looked at the website, I noticed, like I said, that one of the first things was how many licenses you guys are working with. It's a lot of novelty things. You guys do clocks and trains and different decor and such. And I saw stuff from the Turtles. I saw stuff from Star Wars, Star Trek, Aliens, etc., etc. That's an awful lot of licenses to hold. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we have hundreds of licenses. We work with a wide range of artists as well. As you said, we have a really wide range of product forms and categories. So it is an eclectic mix of product, but we do create a lot of very unique things, and we have 100% control over our creative process. It's all conceived here internally. We're not buying products from other third parties. So it's all, conceived here, and it's all exclusive to us.
When you create this stuff, do you create it with the potential license in mind, or do you have the license before you create the product? Generally?
It goes both. It could be both. We have some current contracts with licensors. There are certain product forms that we've committed to for those licensors, but there are times where we say, hey, you know what? I have a great idea for a clock, and it's Bobby Skullface clock, and we don't have this license, and we need to reach out to him. Then our licensing team will reach out to that licensor. Typically, there is a specific branch for the company. There is a corporate office for licensing specifically. A lot of these big licensors have that. There's sometimes it's an artist that has a third-party agency that handles their licensing. licensing, but it can be pretty easy to find generally. Worst case scenario, we've reached out directly to like an artist and said, hey, we'd like to license your artwork. If it's a smaller operation, they might handle it a little differently. But those big licensors, they have entire offices that handle their licensing.
Right. I would imagine that with dealing with the different license holders, there's a different dance to be done with all of them. How do you make contact with those potential holders generally? Or if you give some examples without maybe getting specific, if that would get you in a bag.
For example, if I have a product concept and I want to develop this product, what we do is we put together a concept sketch or a mock-up of the product, and then we would submit that product through their licensing branch. And sometimes it's done through email, and sometimes it's done through a dedicated piece of software or a portal that they have set up. So this is for an established relationship, of course. If it's not established, like I said, I would probably have to just start Googling to try to figure out who owns the rights to the property and then have our licensing team set up a contract. That can be a long, arduous process.
I would imagine. How do you choose which holders to reach out to? Is it more of a fan-based thing where you guys kind of want to work with a specific holder, or is it something where the shoe might just fit this particular foot?
I think it's all basically driven by the concept and the idea. And if we think something is a powerful idea or a powerful concept, then we're going to try to get it done. Sometimes we might look at our array of categories and say, hey, look, we've been really doing well with, hoodies, and this licensor has been really good for us too. How do we put them together? And it might be a license that we've never done a hoodie in. So it might require some additional negotiation. We may have only done, say, like wall art or something to that degree. So it can be very specific on what we're allowed to do and not to do. But like I said, it's the concept really drives it. If we have a really powerful concept, our licensing team goes to bat for us, and they do everything they can to get the licensor to allow us to move forward with the project.
Right.
And often it could be like the licensor comes back just and says, I think you have a great product form, but we don't like this execution. Send us a few more concepts. And that's happened before.
Sure.
Or they might say, we really like it, but you need to make, X, Y, and Z changes. You're not allowed to use this color. This character's hands can't be closed in a fist. It can be very nuanced.
Yeah, I would
in
imagine.
regards to what they want and how they view their characters. It can be kind of mind-boggling at times, but they have a clear vision for their brands as well.
And the identity thereof.
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me as well. And I would imagine that can be grueling and frustrating at times, depending on the case.
Oh, it can actually take years.
Right.
There are times where we've gone to licensors and said, hey, we've got these great ideas and we really love your properties and we think we could create something really special. But they come back to us and say, hey, we don't really want to see our character on that type of product. Time passes on. We reapproach them. Things change, businesses change. They might say, hey, actually, we see the potential here now. Or maybe we internally have had some success in a new category and we reapproach them and say, hey, the proof is in the pudding. Here we're having some success in this category with these licenses that are kind of the same caliber. Are you now interested in approaching this? And they might say, hey, you know what? We didn't see it before, but mock up something and let's see if we can do it.
I would also imagine that sometimes even that when you're working on something that might be perhaps more topical, more of in the kind of modern ether, as opposed to something that you're reaching back on, that by the time that you actually put a prototype design into actual, product, that the dynamics of that design could have changed within the canon of the material that's being presented when you started working on it.
Oh, absolutely. And we ran to this issue recently. It's like anytime there's a new movie planned, there can be cutoffs for when you can market products that have the old designs.
Right.
They might put a hard date on it for us and say, hey, look, we would like you to stop marketing this product at this date because we're going to start transitioning to marketing the new movie, and we just don't want this old product on the market.
Right.
And we work with the licensors, obviously, to try to accommodate that the best we can. There's also a lot of sensitivity to those new designs, and we have to sign a lot of NDAs. We're privy to a lot of new characters and whatnot that are coming out, and that's all very secretive.
Yeah.
So they definitely have some things that are very dynamic out there on the market that could impact what our characters look like and their costumes or the colors or whatnot.
You mentioned to me that Cracked Earth is kind of not newly formed, but newly focused into sort of handling pop culture aspects and brands and so on and so forth. You have already a significant amount of licenses under your belt that the link will be in the description description for everybody that people can browse through and see all the stuff that you guys work with. In the midst of all that, there is some level of establishment there that's kind of surprising. I got two questions in regard to that. One, have any license holders reached out to you? Has it ever gone the other way as a result of previous work?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify real quick, Cracked Earth is a sub-brand within the Bradford Exchange. The Bradford Exchange is the parent entity. A lot of fantastic product has been created through the Bradford Exchange, including properties that are more pop culture driven. But we also felt like we could better service the fans of those pop culture brands, whether it be sci-fi or fantasy or comic book, by creating kind of this new task force, this new studio within the company. So we're hyper focused on creating kind of a new line, kind of adopting some of the product that's already been created and then begin creating new product that's focused on people that like these sci-fi and comic book and fantasy brands. So that's kind of what Cracked Earth is. As far as, whether or not we've been approached, yes, we are approached by multiple licensors. It does go both ways. There are some artists that see that we're, selling similar product or something from like a like artist or a competitor and will approach us as well. But I can't be very specific about who those people are necessarily, but right. It does happen both ways. If you create a compelling product and they see it, it very well could happen. And we've also been around for a long time. So we're kind of an established
Right.
We're an established company, and so people do know of us.
Yeah, and I'm sure that kind of there's somewhat of a snowball effect with all of that as you work with more license holders and as you keep those licenses and are continuing to produce product that is a sign to other holders that, you're relatively easy to work with on some level.
Right, and actually, that's a good point. We can demonstrate the quality of our work and the honest representation of characters through other products we've done if we're looking on onboarding a new licensor and they want to know, what's your approach to product and what's your approach to these character-driven products and how well do they translate. So we have a lot of really good examples of how we've taken the characters and applied them to product effectively and how we've stayed authentic to their designs. Mm-hmm. That's a huge thing. Something that you probably don't realize is these larger licensors have these style guides, which we have access to, and it's really all the official art for that brand. Mm-hmm. I could look up, a holiday version of that character. And they maybe have a holiday version of that character. And we have to show these licensors basically that we stayed true to their style guide images. And we actually have to reference their own style guides to say, here's where the inspiration came from. And we're staying truthful to this design.
And I would imagine that's in order for them to keep it all consistent for their branding.
Correct. Even some elements where we want to do something that's seasonal and they say, well, this character's never been seasonal. So they've never been part of a holiday or we've never presented this character in any sort of light. It's not in the movie or the comic, what have you, in the original material that this character was ever involved with that holiday. So certain properties, it's easier to do things like that. And others takes a lot of convincing to get a licensor to say, hey, can we make this character in a holiday motif? And some say, hey, I see your vision. I think this could be really clever. And some say, absolutely not. This character it's not part of a world where this exists. So we don't want you to do it.
I'm going to ask this question, and I'm almost 100% certain you're not going to be able to answer it. But are there any licenses that you feel like are necessarily easier to work with in that regard, where they're a bit looser? Conversely, are there any where they're much more, where you feel like they're much more stringent, much more kind of not one-dimensional, but specific about how their stuff is used?
Yeah, obviously there's a big gradient. Some licensors have worked with us for a long time and have seen what we've done with their products for a long time and have a comfort level with us where they allow us to be a little more flexible. Some of the more recent licenses, they be more stringent and want to see more proven success before they allow us to get more creative. So that's always a fact. There are certain notorious ones internally here, I can't name by name, that, are very particular about colors, materials, etc.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing,
No, absolutely not. That just means they have a clear vision of what they want,
exactly,
how they want to present their brand.
Exactly.
But it does create limitations. It can potentially inhibit creativity if it's too stringent. But we do our best, and I think the licensors, they want to get their brand out there as well. So we just have to also remember that They just want to get their brand out there in the best possible light. And, everybody does want to work together. So it just takes compromise.
Are there any that come to mind as being, and I'm not even sure if you can discuss this, but that just, seem to be looser or willing to have kind of, I don't want to say more fun, but more experimental and are less stringent in their protection?
I don't think I should probably comment on that. I
Okay.
mean, there's too many licensors for me to even comment on it, even if I want to. But the reality is I just can't be explicit about it.
Right.
Just that there are some that are very involved with the entire process from A to Z, very particular about not just the concept design, but just the materials and how we manufacture it, maybe, et cetera. And then others it also can depend on the type of product, keep in mind.
Right.
There's some products that are way more complicated. I mean, you start bringing music into the mix and you're talking about potentially a separate license.
Right.
You're offering certain products that potentially involve multiple licenses. So you could have multiple brands on a particular product, and then you're going to have to send it through multiple people. You're going to have to think about likenesses. So you might have a particular license and you can create a great product and the licensor can love it, but it may contain an actor or a character that's a specific likeness of a real person
that haven't signed off.
Potentially they might have to review the product as well.
Right. Sometimes at our, the ground level, so to speak, we get rumors and hubbub about that in regard to kind of toy likenesses sometimes, especially in the early days before character actors had to kind of sign off as soon as they take the role.
Right.
The next thing I wanted to ask you, and once again, I know you're going to have to speak in generalities, but, the licensing is obviously the companies are using it to expand their brand and so on and so forth. And there's all sorts of give and take in regards to it. But at the end of the day, it is the dollar bill that usually makes the world go round. And I'm sure you guys have to account for that in your pricing. Talk a little bit about that process.
Well, we price our products the same, no matter what the license. And I think you can see that if you go out and look at a product that we've done with multiple brands, that we're going to price it all the same way. We got some great floor lamps out there right now, and I know that we've done that, multiple brands, and we have more coming. But like if you take a product form and put them side by side, we're charging you the same amount, regardless of what we're paying the licensor. That being said, obviously, there's varying terms of all of our licensing agreements. There's certainly certain products that are much more costly for us and much more challenging for us internally to bring them to market because of those licensing contracts. So we don't think it's fair to necessarily translate that to the customer.
Mm-hmm. So it comes out of your end, basically, depending on the variance.
Right. We want to offer the product for the best possible price, and then that's what we're going to sell the product for. As a customer, I mean, think about it. If you had the two products side by side, you're like, why would I be paying $20 more for this product? It's the same thing. And that's just, that just hurts our relationship with our customers.
Yeah.
So we don't do stuff like that. Yeah. Behind the scenes here, when we're looking at product to develop and hitting the go button on certain products, like I've seen products that we haven't been able to move forward with because of it, because we were not willing to increase the retail.
And I think that also keeps it consistent for your customers, because if they're into a particular type of product and then they want to see if it's available in some other kind of franchise or deco and have a price point in mind as to it, like if a gift for someone else or something, then they already sort of have a baseline knowledge of what they're getting into. So that makes sense. Without specifics, could you give us an idea or a range or a rough estimate as to what that cut usually is?
I think I have to leave that blank. Unfortunately, it's a fair enough variance, and it can depend on the product, and it can depend on co-brand. It can depend on a lot of things.
Right.
So, yeah, unfortunately, I can't.
Just the details of that contract.
Yeah.
Because you don't want somebody ratcheting up their
there are NDAs in place. There are contracts in place. I can't really. That's not something I can touch on. Unfortunately, there are times where if you have a license that is financially demanding, that it could potentially be very hard to bring the product to market at the retail we want to bring it to market.
I would imagine that to be true. At least I tried. You've touched on it briefly already, but what is the approval process like? If you were to kind of lay it out in a 5 to 10 step program, what is that like?
So initially, the developer creates a concept. It could be a sketch and it could be a full Photoshop mock-up. And then internally, we go through a few rounds where we are fine-tuning that. We're deciding what looks best, what's the most marketable, what materials to make it out of, what functions do we want it to have. For example, a clock. We could put animation in the clock. We could put sound in the clock. What type of sound? Is it music, etc.? We button up the details before we send it to the licensor. And then we send that out to the licensor, often with multiple views of the product so they can understand kind of what it looks like from different angles, and they'll provide feedback. So they may come back and say, hey, we see your vision and it's approved and move forward. Or they may say, okay, we like this, but this character can't be standing next to this character. Or the colors are slightly wrong. You need to adhere by, our style guide, Pantone, whatever. So they may request changes. They may not. And then once we get an approval from a licensor, that can go into a phase where we're actually beginning to produce the product. So what the vendor will do is we'll let them know, we'll provide them with the updated images, and then we'll say, okay, let's move to the sculpting phase. And if a sculpture, what they'll do is they'll create a rough clay sculpture and send us 360-degree images. We'll give comments like proportional comments. How does this look? Is this character the right proportions next to this character? Make it smaller, bigger, whatever. So once that all is figured out, they do a very more detailed sculpt. And that detailed sculpt is going to be more like what the final product is going to look like. That detailed sculpt then gets sent to us in 360 degrees, do a turnaround from every angle. We send that to the licensor again. Basically, the licensor is involved in multiple stages, even once the product is approved, the concept. So that goes to the vendor, and the vendor will have some comments about, how the sculpture looks. They're going to be even more detail-oriented at this stage because this is getting closer to a real product.
Right.
They may approve a concept that's a little looser because they like the concept, but when it gets to the sculpting stage, they're going to be a lot more detail-oriented. Keep in mind, these approval phases can take weeks before we get feedback. So
right.
Each of these phases, and I might have to go back to the vendor and have them re-sculpt a part. That could take weeks. So there's a lot of back and forth involved. And then once we go to casting, they basically create the whiteware. Essentially, that look what the final like resin sculpt would look like. And this is if it's a sculpted product. I'm using this as an example.
Right.
But that's like an unpainted statue, and you've seen these probably online. That it's just whiteware.
Yeah.
The product unpainted. I've seen some companies bring them to shows and things. That's just like the unpainted version of the product.
Right.
And then they do a painted version that also the images do have to go to the licensor again once it's painted. So that's the MFP stage. It's a prototype. We get it in, we look at it, and we make our changes because the next stage is basically prepping for production. And there is a final sample that we get called a PPS sample. It's a pre-production sample. And so basically they're tooled up and ready to run a full production of the product at that point. It's our final chance at making comments essentially before they do the full run. Usually we shouldn't be making many changes at that point, but it still goes through licensor approval. So really the licensor is involved at every one of these stages. Any one of these stages, they can make changes.
Right.
So they're conscious that it's at a pre-production stage. Hopefully at that point, they're sensitive to the fact that they shouldn't be making a lot of changes, but it happens.
Right.
So,
And would you say that's fairly, like, roughly, generally consistent across the board in terms of how it goes? I'm sure that each license holder has its own little nuances and all that, but generally speaking, like rough sketch idea that's pretty consistent.
Yeah, it is pretty consistent. I would say that when we approach projects, we're actually doing them with different sources also. So I would argue that also we have some sources that are very good working with certain licenses and others that require more work on our end to get to the right points where the quality is exactly what we want. So that could play a factor as far as time. But yeah, overall, it's pretty consistent as far as the process goes.
Gotcha.
The phases of the approval, some of them can move much faster. It could depend on the character. It could depend on the product. If I'm doing a product that basically features two-dimensional artwork, that could go a lot faster because I'm not sculpting the character.
Right.
I'm using their proprietary artwork that they've provided for us. They can't have that many comments about their artwork unless we've modified it a whole ton. They may have some comments, but the reality is that's going to go a lot faster. It's easier to update. We're much more nimble when it comes to modifying two-dimensional artwork. But any sort of 3D sculpt. And the other thing is, and I'd mentioned that it starts with clay sculpts, but it doesn't always. It could start with digital 3D sculpts. And if we start there, what happens is we have to prototype the product and prep it for 3D printing. I'm sure you're aware out there that that's the norm for a lot of companies. There's some we 3D print, there's some we don't. We have some phenomenal sculptors out there who are able to capture the products in the right way. But certain properties, we choose to do some 3D printing.
Yeah, I'm sure that whole technology has kind of had a great impact on what you do.
Oh, definitely.
And the accessibility of that.
We want to bring it out of the collector's room and then kind of like more into our lives, whether it be home decor, home furnishings, or apparel. I think that there's a lot of product categories where we can bring products to fans where they can say, hey, okay, look, I'm a big fan of this particular movie or this particular comic, and I'd love to have a lamp or whatever in my living room that's tasteful and I could keep out, and it's just like compelling to look at and doesn't look like a toy. I think that's part of the mission.
I hear you. Of the merchandise, and I kind of understand that because I do some stuff as well, merchandise wise, on the business end of what I do, and I'm often trying to come up with ideas of items too that celebrate a passion or a fandom or whatever, but also serve a functionality. That it's not, you eventually run out of wall space if you're just doing prints, right?
Right.
So yeah, I can understand that. Do you guys have any ideas of where your sort of philosophy will expand your merchandise in that regard?
Well, I mean, we certainly have a long list of categories that we're looking at. I mean, for example, things like handbags and apparel, even jewelry, potentially like replica jewelry and things like that. I mean, this is all just off the cuff, but right. I mean, we do have actually a defined list of categories that we think that we can expand, especially in apparel, jewelry, home decor, that we think are great opportunities for the brands that we have.
Nice. Before we get out of here, I have to, or my viewership will never forgive me. Have you guys worked with Hasbro?
I am uncertain. I don't think so. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm not currently working with them.
Okay.
We're not currently doing any Transformers, but man, that would be great. It'd be great to do some.
Gotcha. So thank you, Drew, for coming on. The company is the Bradford Exchange. Cracked Earth is would you say, division of it?
Yeah, a division. We're like a studio within the company. Yeah.
Okay. The links to all of that will be in the description. And one last question before I take us out of here, and that is, I saw that you guys have a statue of the Archangel Michael.
Yeah.
How much does a Bible license cost?